names. Please be seated. Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Sofoklis Goulis will defend the academic thesis, Framing Effect and Hippocampal Dynamics in Economic Decision-Making, Insights from Human Intracranial and Electroencephalography and Ultra-High Field 70 fMRI. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. In the following minutes, I will present you a conceptual summary of the main research that went into my PhD thesis entitled Framing Effect and Hippocampal Dynamics in Economic Decision-Making, where we essentially studied the activity in a key brain region where we make a specific type of decisions. And that brain region is called the hippocampus. It's actually a Greek word for the seahorse marine animal, and it's a deep brain structure known to be the brain's episode maker. It allows us to store and retrieve information from our lives, to navigate spaces and form associations. But recently, it's also showing up when people weigh options, when they imagine outcomes, and when they use context to make decisions, suggesting it has a role in the evaluation step of decision-making, yet it is unclear to what degree this function is separate from its role in memory. This background raised the core questions of my thesis, which were, is the hippocampus also involved when we evaluate options with purely monetary outcomes, which are not episodically laden, and does it do so differentially depending on the context where we're at? And by context here, I mean in the presence of a classic decision-making bias called the framing effect. Now, this is a simple example to illustrate the framing effect. What you see here are two yogurts, which are identical, but the one on the right is described as being 80% fat-free, and the one on the left is described as being 20% fat. Now, yogurts are identical, but their description makes them feel different. The one on the right highlights what is healthy and good, while the one on the left highlights what is unhealthy and risky. And this is shown also in consumer preference, where positive descriptions are generally preferred. You can also think of other examples. For example, when you buy a car, you're told you have 4 years where you won't need to buy any replacement parts. You're not told that on the 5th year you will have to come back. And same with a doctor, you are told they have 90% success rate. You're not being told that they have 10% of complications. Now, we sought to study the framing effects in a specific context and apply the same logic with money. And this is the risky choice monetary framing design. It's essentially the experiment that our participants run and has been repeated many times at the behavioral level. And example trials go like this. So in the beginning, you're given a monetary amount. So you're being told you receive 100 euros, but then you're being prompted to make a choice between two alternatives. And the one is to gamble if you want to actually keep that whole amount or accept a smaller portion of it. Now, importantly, the way you accept that smaller portion of it can be described in two different ways. So what you see on the upper right is the description in the so-called gain frame, where the positive description with the positive outcome is highlighted. And in this example, you're being told that you would keep 20 euros. Implicit in that would be that you lose 80 euros from the previously 100. Now, in other trials, you might encounter a context where the outcome is described in the loss frame. So instead of being told directly what you're going to keep, you're being told what you're losing from what you were given before. So you're told that you, for example, lose 80 euros from the previous 100, thus again, you will have 20. Even though the outcomes of these example trials are identical though, it's shown at the population level that subjects do prefer to gamble more when the description of the sure option is in a negative valence, so the so-called loss frame, rather than the gain frame. So this is the context which we used in our experiments, and we sought to record activity from the hippocampus during that process from humans. And we had the opportunity and privilege to have access to state-of-the-art recording techniques. The first one being with stereotactic electroencephalography. These are depth electrodes that go inside the brains of epileptic patients for the purpose of epileptic monitoring, and in the meantime they can participate in experiments. These recordings provide us access to the local electrophysiology of the brain location where they are implanted at. And the other technique was brain scanning with MRI. So this was the same machine where you get an MRI of your knee, but it's optimized to scan from the brain at very high resolution and not only look at the anatomy, but also look at activity over time. So now I'll move to the results from the first experiment I described with the depth recordings. On the very left, you see a figure with a red and a blue line, and the height of the figure indicates how much subjects wanted to gamble. And on the horizontal axis, you see that the height is separated depending on the amount they were initially endowed. And what you see is that the two lines are diverging, especially when the endowed amount was high, and this is the framing effect. So subjects prefer to gamble more in the loss frame, so when the alternative was described in a negative valence, rather than the gain frame. Now, in the middle, I have some results from the electrophysiology. And what you look here is the activity in the hippocampus analyzed in a specific way. So at the electrophysiological level, there are multiple phenomena that the brain can have, and we focused at the so-called slow waves or theta oscillations, which are the ones that are most associated with episodic memory and navigation in the hippocampus. So we tracked activity in that phenomenon throughout trials, and what you see here is the signal from the many hippocampi, from many patients and many trials averaged all together. And what you can see is that when the options are presented to the subjects, and for the first second throughout, these sort of activities ramped up, suggesting that in some way, the hippocampus is likely involved in the valuation of the options that are provided in the screen. Then we sought to understand how this increase in activity is different depending on the frame where they were at and the decision they eventually made. And these are the results you see on the very right. And what you can actually see, if you look a bit more carefully, is that when subjects chose in line with the framing effect, so when they gambled in the loss frame or kept a sure option in the gain frame, the activity in the hippocampus was the least. While in the other conditions, in the green rectangle on top, activity was increased. And if we take these results combined, it suggests that the hippocampus likely has a role in the valuation of options in these type of designs. And this valuation is kind of hijacked when people decide based on an emotionally driven decision-making bias. Now I'll move on to the results from the fMRI experiment. So this is the scanner we have here in Maastricht, the ultra-high field scanner, and where we collected our data. And right below, you see again what subjects wanted to gamble. And you see that differentially depending on the frame where they're at. And again, we saw a robust difference between description in the loss rather than the gain frame. So the height of the bar of the red bar is bigger than the height of the blue bar. Now, in the middle, you see an example scan from one participant. And if you look a bit more carefully, you will see a structure in the middle in green. And this is the left and right hippocampus of that subject, from which we took all the data across time. And we did that across all subjects. And we averaged that depending on the decision they were doing. And then we get a figure, as you see directly on the right. Again, the two vertical lines indicate when subjects saw the amount in the screen and when they were provided the options. And now, if you look more carefully, you will realize we don't find the same results as before, both in the left and the right hippocampus. And also when we modeled the data to track the activity over time, we did not see a difference depending on frame or decision. Now, these results are not necessarily in conflict with the results we found in the electrophysiology, as the two recording techniques sometimes record non-overlapping brain phenomena. Now, having said that, throughout this process and also in the beginning, implicit in that task is that subjects, when they estimate the outcome of a trial in the loss frame, they have to perform a mental subtraction. So if you're told you lose 80 euros, you have to think, okay, 100 minus 80, I get 20. And we thought that this might be a confound, as it can, some subjects might have less arithmetic capacity, or they might be less attentive throughout this experiment. And this could nudge them to pick the gamble option, not necessarily because of emotions, but because they are not, they rather not perform this mental subtraction. So to this end, I developed a matching arithmetic task, which subjects performed right after the framing when they were scanned. And it was identical in structure as the monetary framing task, but they were only prompted to perform the same subtraction they had to do when they had to deal with money. And when we analyze the data from these two experiments combined, we get results that look like this. So on the very left, every single dot represents one subject. And this red line that tracks the activity across all subjects indicates that the ones that were slowest in performing the mental subtraction were also the ones that had more framing, suggesting there is an underlying factor that can explain both, and it's not necessarily emotions. And then on the right, very interestingly, when we analyzed the activity in the hippocampus when the subjects performed the mental subtraction, and we tracked activity over time and across all subjects and all trials, you see a result that looks like this. On the lines of the activity over time, you don't see something, but when you model this activity and you take the difference in activity between subtraction and no subtraction, you see that it correlates very strongly with the reaction time, where subjects that were the slowest in performing the subtraction were also the ones that had the highest hippocampal activity, suggesting the hippocampus has a role therein. With this, I would like to summarize the results I had in my thesis. I had the privilege to have access to complementary recording techniques from the human brain, and the first results from invasive electrophysiology pointed to the hippocampus having a broad role in valuation and go in the opposite direction of framing, while the ones with the fMRI neuroimaging suggested a role in the arithmetic aspect or the cognitive aspect of the framing effect. I think with this, I would like to close my presentation. I would like to quickly thank my supervisors for their support and trust throughout these years, and also my mentors. Without all of these people, I wouldn't be here today, and to them I owe everything. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by Professor Riedel from the School of Business and Economics of Maastricht University.
Okay, so thank you very much, Chair, to give me the word first. So, first of all, thank you for finally explaining to me and us why your name is sometimes written with an E, sometimes written with an I, so Sofoklis and Sofoklis. Thank you very much, but that's not the reason why we are here. So I would like, first of all, to congratulate you with this very fine piece of work. You are a student of the so-called Center of Integrated Neuroscience, which was actually founded by the professor next to me, among others. And I'm very happy that you're here and that you see this thesis, because it's a truly interdisciplinary piece of work, and that was precisely the intention of this initiative. So there is behavioral economics work integrated, and 3-4 different methods from neuroscience. It's really impressive what you did. So I really enjoyed reading it, and I think it's really a very, very fine piece of work, and I would like to congratulate you with that. Very sincerely and honestly. But I'm here also to ask a question. So I would like to ask a question. Start out with chapter 3, which is a purely behavioral task. So here also, feel perhaps most confident, because I'm at the end a behavioral economist, even when doing some neuroeconomics. So. I think it's a very, very nice chapter you have, and you basically look into, so the main question is whether there's a difference between simultaneous and sequential presentation of the gains and losses paradigm, right? As an economist, so I'm also looking at the motivation of this kind of work. And I would like, you give a very nice overview about the literature and that there are mixed results and there's not so much done in this, or actually there's nothing done in this. So, but what I was missing a little bit, right, is so why the hell should I be interested in this, right? So from a more profane viewpoint, right? So just, you do fundamental research, and I think it's very important, but it would also be nice to know a little bit more, okay, so what kind of behavior can I understand better when I understand this behavior between sequential and simultaneous? Are there situations, I don't know, of investments decisions, right, in economics? But not only this, you could also think about risky decision making in everyday life, right? Whether you ride a motorbike or not, whether you are going bungee jumping or not, mountaineering, this kind of thing. So I would like you to deliberate a little bit on this, more practical issues of the paradigm you present to us and you have investigated. And as a follow-up to this, I would like to, because it's very much related to prospect theory, right? So the gains and losses, we talk about loss aversion, that's part of Kahneman's and Tversky's prospect theory, and you motivate, amongst others, your hypothesis with what you call the anchor and adjust heuristics. What I would like to know and understand a little bit better, how this is related to prospect theory. So which part of prospect theory is this related to? I mean, prospect theory consists of several pieces, right? And I would like to know from you, so where this anchor and adjust heuristics fits in. And can you say anything about what prospect theory, you give a nice intuition why it should matter in this way, but can you give some, educated opinion on if prospect theory would predict such behavior? So that would be my first question.
Okay. Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your very kind words and for your questions. If I understand correctly, these are three questions. The first one is why we run the sequential design. The second one, what is the application of the sequential in society? And the third one is, what is the relationship of this chapter to prospect theory and the role of the anchor and adjust therein, right?
You can cut it up in this way if you want.
Okay. So the very first question, why we run this experiment? So when we ran the experiment, as I showed earlier with the electrophysiology, we noticed that patients demonstrate the framing effect only when the endowed amount was really high and not when it was not. So this means, knowing that we would run the fMRI experiment, we might run the risk of having trials where we have no framing effect. And these are kind of trials that don't help a lot with the analysis. So in that sense, we were already thinking, okay, if there's something we could do in the design that might probe the framing effect to be actually stronger, because the idea was that, okay, if the very first thing you show is the thing that actually bears some emotional meaning, we would expect, due to primacy mechanisms, and now I'm kind of answering the third one a bit, due to primacy mechanisms, the framing effect to be stronger. So answering the first question, the motivation was to find a way, and that's 1A, because I have a 1B, to find a way to increase the framing effect, to make it stronger. Another reason related to the motivation was that when subjects performed the electrophysiological experiment, we had no access to what subjects were looking at. They were sitting in the clinic and they have a laptop and they see both. And I mean, the advantage of these recordings is that they track brain activity in real time. But when I average many trials, I cannot know if at 500 milliseconds thereafter, they're looking at option 1 or option 2. So I said, okay, if I run this type of experiment, I also win something else. I know what they're looking at. And I can time lock activity to specifically the option they are sampling, not both of them. Yes. So I think these were the main two, let's say, neuroscientific reasons why we wanted to run this. The applicability of this, more generally, I mean, it has to do, like, for example, if you imagine the government bringing some leaflet or has some website where you see options relating to the choices you want to do about your pension or how you make your tax, you can assume that if you realize that the sequential presentation of options has a drastic difference than presenting all options to people on the same time, it can nudge you to present, it can motivate the presentation of options sequentially, depending, of course, if I should say this, on what you want. If you want them to choose more emotionally, let's say, assuming this would be a mechanism that we did not find, you would know that, okay, if I want to probe them to respond more emotionally, I should first present the emotionally laden option and then the other. If I would want them to be more neutral, I would present them on the same time. This could be something that you can imagine in the daily life. And coming back to the third question, well, the anchor and adjust, there is a lot of behavioral economics literature in which I'm not necessarily an expert, but I came across this framework and I thought it's important to position our findings relative to it. But I don't outline specifically the predictions based on this. I think our motivation was more a primacy mechanism, which I outlined directly before that, where the stimulus that is sampled first is the one that is overweighted. While the anchor and adjust suggests that you anchor on the first and then you change the second, you estimate the second based on the first. And you asked me a subcomponent for prospect theory.
What I wanted to to get at is, in a sense, prospect theory consists basically of it's also sequential, right? It consists of two parts, but mostly the first part is forgotten. And that's so the second part is the probability weighting and the loss aversion. Everyone knows, or most people know. But the first is actually the editing part, right? What they call editing, basically how you frame for yourself the decision problem, which at the end might lead to for instance, different probability weighting, different perception of the losses. And I think what you refer to, and I think that's very nice, and they could have worked this out, I think, a little bit more, that you can have something to say about the editing phase of prospect theory, right? Because it depends how you present the options, how, at least that's the hypothesis, how depending on how you present the option, that's the way how people look at this problem and reframe it for themselves to make the decision afterwards. So, so that's very nice. Anyway, so.
But I totally see the merit in going in depth more in that. I didn't have the time, but I totally see the merit. I totally understand it. Yes.
Thank you. I'm satisfied.
Okay. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Vries from Max Planck Institute of Biological Cybernetics in Tübingen.
Yeah, thank you. So I also want to congratulate you for your thesis. It's very impressive how you managed to combine economic investigation with these different, both very advanced recording methodologies, high field 7 Tesla MRI and intracranial EEG, both state-of-the-art methods, and how you managed to achieve insights from this. Let me actually quickly, my thing is jumping around here. Okay, that's better now. So I would like to discuss with you about your chapter number 5, where you've analyzed the intracranial EEG data with regard to infra-slow oscillations. And in particular, I would like to discuss with you the analyses of interactions between different contacts in the brain, particularly what you looked at in figure 3 there. It's highly interesting and I think very comforting that you find that often these infra-slow oscillations show time lags. So if you do a cross-correlation, basically, there is a peak with a lag that is often on the order of several seconds, up to 10 seconds. So that definitely excludes some trivial explanations like that this is due to a common reference or volume conduction. But you also stress that this rules out a common driving force. And you, for example, you give us an example, breathing. And I want to challenge you on this. I can well imagine that an external driving force, and I would particularly consider a gastric rhythm, which is exactly in the frequency range of 0.06 hertz that you described there, that this could drive one brain region, so one contact, let's say, in one phase relation to the gastric rhythm, for example, or the driving force, and another brain region, another contact at a slightly different phase relation. And thereby in the brain, you're going to see a time lag of 5, 6, 7 seconds, and still they are both driven by a common driver. So that's, why did you exclude this, this possibility? And the next question would be, why would it even be a problem, right? I mean, I would consider this highly interesting. And I guess then it's difficult from your analysis to conclude who is driving whom. So that would be my next question. If you would consider this, how could you go about finding out who is driving whom here, right? So maybe we stay with those two questions first and then we can go.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind word. Getting to the crux of your question, I think I kind of agree with you. Perhaps what I mean more with saying we exclude breathing or any sort of other mechanism that has to do with direct arousal is to have an influence directly on the recordings themselves. So when we collect data from scalp EEG, we have slow drifts that have to do with the apparatus itself and the conductance on the skin that don't have to do anything with brain activity. It's something that is very local on how the sensor picks up signal, essentially. When it comes to the breathing, I think I've given it much more thought. when it comes to the interpretation of what these oscillations actually are. And I do think that a possible explanation could have to do with breathing, which is having different relationship with a local phase at various brain locations. There would be a small problem with this interpretation when it comes to why is it only in central brain regions, and why, for example, when I look at some patients and I look at the putamen, I see a very clear signal, but the moment I get outside of it, it's not there. So it means there is something that has to do with the brain region itself and not just some generalized being medial, let's say, axis. So yes, it would be very interesting to try to answer the question, why would it be so different across regions? Maybe neurovascular coupling, but still open. So yes, and I think this kind of relates to your second question. Yes, it's not necessarily a problem. Yes, and on the same time.
Oh, thank you. This is really clarifying. So I guess it would be good if you would then if you work this into a manuscript and a publication, basically distinguish from kind of trivializing accounts by means of, for example, driving by breathing versus kind of physiological relationships, right? So I now see your point, right? So I guess it's just a matter of how you pitch it. Yeah.
Perhaps I would add that also, if we assume, based on this data, that indeed infraslow oscillations have some role in local excitability that affects other rhythms of cognition, which have to do more with local and instantaneous computation, let's say gamma or broadband high gamma. It would be also, since we find the phase amplitude relationship there, if we accept the premise that it's breathing and might be something generalized and comes at different phases, then the answer would be, if the downstream effect of that phase difference, which would be the difference amplitude in the gamma that reflects local computation, why would it be high in some regions and low in others? So I think then we would get into network dynamics and local computation, which we could not do here because we didn't have enough data. But yes, what I'm saying is it raises the question about the downstream influence in the gamma that reflects cognition, and it would have to come at different amplitudes between different regions, if it makes sense.
And how would you go about finding out who is driving whom? Like, if you would accept that this is not necessarily a problem and you would like to dig a bit deeper.
Who is driving whom in this case is infraslow and breathing or infraslow and other frequencies?
Any one of those options.
Oops.
Oh, no, sorry. Who is driving whom in the sense of, for example, breathing driving the different brain areas or the brain areas driving breathing?
Well, for the breathing, it's simpler, or okay, maybe it's not much simpler, but we would get breathing data. I mean, yeah, yes. We would track essentially like when they're breathing, when they're expanding, and when they're not, and when they're collapsing. So we would reference brain signals relative to the ongoing rhythm of the breath, right? To the mechanical rhythm of the breath.
Yes, I think that would be one step towards figuring it out. I guess you then still need to consider analytical techniques like, for example, Granger causality or dynamic causal modeling to then get at the question of who is driving whom, right?
Yeah, true.
Once
Yeah.
you have the data.
That's not sufficient, yes. And should I also answer about the gamma, or so?
Sure, go on.
Then we would apply Granger causality in the gamma time series. So I think the same type of analysis to see which one is driving which. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that there is also another paper which very interestingly shows that the dynamics of ions of the calcium-potassium pump can give rise to infraslow fluctuations based on spiking. In other words, it's signals, it might be a downstream effect. Now, it's sort of a bit like chicken and egg. Okay, if the brain is really active, then it might have to do with the ion balance. So saturating the ion bed and then creating an infraslow wave, but then it may be that the wave itself is affecting the next volley of spikes. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. Yeah, thank you.
The session will be continued by Professor Engelman from the University of
First, allow me to join my colleagues in congratulating you. I very much enjoyed reading your thesis. I thought it's on a very timely topic that's relevant for neuroeconomics, namely the involvement of the hippocampus in decision processes. So it's refreshing to see that people start focusing on other regions outside of the old reward system, if you will. And the hippocampus is clearly an interesting region. Being involved in episodic memory can give context to your decisions based on past experiences. So it's very interesting from that perspective. Also, obviously, like my predecessors have mentioned, you use a very impressive range of neuroscientific techniques and combine this with an interesting behavioral task. So it's all very interesting. Noteworthy are high field fMRI, although is 70 still high field? We're at 14T now, right? I don't know. And the other one is obviously the stereotactic encephalography that you use. So all very impressive, and the combination of this obviously is very nice. But I'm not here just to congratulate you, but also to ask a question. So here's my question. It's something actually that you alluded to in your talk already, which is the mismatch between the results of experiment 1, the SEEG results, and the fMRI results from experiment 3. So after reading chapter 1, you're obviously primed, and if you read this in the chronological order, that you expect something to see in the fMRI results in the hippocampus as well. And it doesn't look like there is much there. If you look at figure 2, page 90, it doesn't look like the hippocampus is much involved based on the fMRI data. Now, obviously, a reader is surprised by this, but I was particularly surprised because actually the fMRI signal measures something or is correlated with what the EEG signal measures, namely these local field potentials. This has been shown by work by Logothetis et al. In 2001, that the fMRI signal is correlated with these LFPs, especially in this frequency band that you're also looking at. And then also, more recent work has shown that there should actually be a negative correlation between the bold response and low frequency local field potentials. So maybe this explains a bit your amygdala findings, but I'm asking here about this mismatch, right? So I'm wondering why you observe this. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think can explain these discrepancies between these two modalities or these two experiments that you run? So the task seems to be exactly the same, right? Unless I missed something, maybe there's some small changes, but you introduce this computational task, if you will, as an additional one. Maybe that changes things, but I doubt it. Are there other methodological limitations that I'm missing? Are there task-specific effects? Could it be due to the different subject pools? I mean, you have patients in one and I guess healthy students in the other experiment. Or are there different neural processes that are being captured? So let me stop here for now and give you some time to answer. I might have some follow-ups to this then.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words. I could do a second PhD on that matter. So I would like to take things from a bit of the beginning. So when we studied and we learned about fMRI, we kind of thought that tracks all sorts of brain activity underneath, and especially the study of Logothetis was such a great paper that went into detail. But there are some issues. So first of all, I think it validates fMRI in the macaque sensory cortex. And they do show that the bold signal, if I remember correctly, relates more with high frequencies, not theta. And they don't show something about the hippocampus. Then, a few years later, they have another paper which actually studies the hippocampus, but doesn't look at the LFP of the hippocampus. It looks at sharp wave ripples at the hippocampus. And it doesn't look at the bold signal there. It looks at the bold signal at downstream network regions, suggesting that the hippocampus is entraining a brain-wide response. So insofar, I think we don't have evidence. At that year, at 2014, we wouldn't have evidence about intracranial recordings in humans in the hippocampus, which is a different type of cortex. We have the trisynaptic circuit. It's an archicortex. It's a different type of thing from the six-layered sensory cortex from the macaque visual cortex. So it's a strong assumption to assume that the neurovascular coupling would be identical. Now, a few years later, we also get evidence of absence. Insofar we had absence of evidence, So with the study of Ekstrom, where they studied in patients with intracranial recordings, so they get the fMRI before they are implanted and then they get implanted, and they do see that slow frequencies track with bold fMRI, but not in the hippocampus, in the parahippocampal brain area. So in that sense, they study all the bands. They don't find that theta tracks bold. Then there is another study from the same author, same author is in the same group of authors, 2021, I think, where they do find that the hippocampal gamma in the LFP relates to the bold, again with the same outside the scanner intracranial, inside the scanner bold. So yeah, I think if I would take these 4 pieces of information, I think it's still, there is no sufficient evidence to suggest that in humans, intracranial LFP at the theta range directly translates to bold. Yes.
Okay, so you're saying it's different modalities, and you would expect different effects based on that alone. That seems to be answered.
My answer is that bold is better for gamma and for cortex.
Okay. Okay, good, interesting. So well, maybe let me ask a follow-up question to this. So one thing that I did notice is that basically the amygdala does then follow what you would expect, right? So the amygdala kind of shows these, these bold effects. It's contributing to the task in some sense, right? To the computations involved in the task. So I wonder how specific your EEG electrodes are in picking up hippocampus signal and whether they may also be influenced by the signal from the amygdala, especially given the close anatomical location of these 2 regions.
Great question as well. Then I think I will rely on previous evidence suggesting that, first of all, no, before I go to the previous evidence, I should note that in the supplementary material of the first chapter, first empirical chapter, I outline the locations where the electrodes are implanted, and we don't have a clear bias to be at the head of the hippocampus, so close to the amygdala. They're evenly distributed head, body, and tail. So I think this positions the results to not be that close to that. So the tail of the hippocampus is not that close to the amygdala, let's put it that way. And what I mean by that close, I think there is previous evidence which models the spread of each band in LFPs. And the lower frequencies spreaded more, so that argument I totally understand, but I think still it was in the order of 8 millimeters, or something on that range, which I don't think is enough to bias the entirety of the hippocampal signal. Yes. And I mean, this is the theoretical answer. I also tried analyzing the data with other montages that are contaminating the signal, but controlling for being a bit more local. So you get less information, but it's more local. For example, bipolar, and I think I got the same results, but this is not reported, so I cannot really use that card, I guess.
Great. Do I have time for one final follow-up really briefly?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Then the last thing that I wondered in relation to this question is, how much does this depend on maybe whether your fMRI model is optimal or not? So the way I understood it is, if you look at the figure that shows the task, first of all, that the presentation amount and the decision periods are not separable. There is no jitter between this, so they're going to be correlated in your final model. This is not necessarily a problem, but maybe the way you model isn't optimal to really get at the decision period. So the way I would remodel this, if I was to analyze this, and I wonder what you think about this, is maybe to model this amount presentation period simply as a stick function. So I think you're modeling the entire period, which leads to a very huge correlation with the decision periods afterwards. And instead link the decision period to the button press and maybe 2 seconds before that. So that way you have an early decision period, which would be the amount presentation, and a late decision period, which are then decoupled from each other because of the variability that's introduced by reaction time, which varies across trials and across subjects. This way you'd have an early and a late decision period that you could look at and see whether the hippocampus is involved in either one of these. Right now, everything seems to be highly correlated and you really just have one period there, but you're modeling 2. So this might be suboptimal. What do you think of this? Do you think this could be a solution?
I think it's a great idea. The reason to follow this route was to stick in line with previous results. So this study, this sort of design, began in 2006 in 1.5 Tesla. They show only amygdala and ACC, DLPFC. They moved on in the 3 Tesla a few years ago. Again, they find amygdala and some frontal regions, still no hippocampus. So I think our first goal was to replicate the design instead of jumping into a much better and more detailed modeling technique. And then try and replicate what they have found, as I replicate with the amygdala, and also see if just by changing the field and the resolution, I could find something in the hippocampus, not by also changing the way I model the data.
Yeah, that makes sense. If this was your original plan, then it's good to stick to it. But it's just a thought I had and to solve this correlated task events issue that you have there. But thank you very much for answering my questions. I think I've hogged enough time.
Will be continued by Professor Jansma from Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience of Maastricht University.
Thank you, Corrector. Dear candidate, first of all, let me congratulate you and also your supervisor team for this great work. I enjoyed reading it a lot. And as Arno already stressed, I'm very proud you are some sort of role model of the SIN Institute standing here. And I think there should be much more like you to come. I'm also happy to see that you're a good postdoc already at some island somewhere outside Europe. So, it's also nice to see you again, by the way. But I also would like to ask some questions, and one is related to the concept of framing. And of course, I'm coming from language, and there people look into framing from 2 perspectives, namely from that of the sender, and you have specific intuition to frame something because you actually want to manipulate someone else. And then there's the receiver who should be able to pick up this type of manipulation. So if you present me something with loss, I could easily say, oh, he's mean to me. Or I would say, you gain, I could say, oh, he's a nice guy today, so he will help me. So there is this emotional extra. You already shortly addressed that. But I wonder what exactly this framing then entails in the receiver. Did you check how people actually receive loss and gain frames? That would be one question. And what is the information processing theory of framing there? So how do people actually receive that and interpret that frame?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words. It's also nice to be here and see you again. I spoke with subjects when I got them outside of the scanner. This is the main route where I interacted with people, and then I asked them what they thought of the experiment, and then I realized if they were aware of the manipulation or not. But I did not ask them if they felt offended when they were told they are losing something. So if I understand correctly, you're asking about their perception of being presented losses. I did not collect any information on that front.
That's fair enough, but so one could think about sort of including this. Then what is interesting also is the phenomenon that you receive the framing effect when you use 100 euro as a target, but not 50. So I lean back, and you in your introduction, you basically nicely stressed that framing was investigated in this Yoko type a lot already, but not yet in incentives in the context of economy. You did that. This is great. But then if we think of the brain being 200,000 years old, why do you think there is a difference between a symbolic target in loss and frame or evolutionary very relevant one like Jogurt? So why would you think, what would be the biological differences in framing processing for symbolic values versus values that are evolutionary, eventually already implemented in the brain since quite some while?
Are you asking me if I believe that they are different, or if I attribute the effects?
I want to hear your view on it.
I would speculate that there is some brain region, I don't know if it's the amygdala or the hippocampus, that encodes loss. So the moment you realize that something is taken from you, it knows. Now, whether it knows the same, whether you lose food or pension, I don't know. It would be interesting to do this type of experiments with perhaps more linguistic descriptions of things they can lose from their daily lives, and which are more pragmatic.
Or
you lose your car or your house, or I don't know.
Or you include control. So if you say, so the question is this a general mechanism that you're tapping into, or is this a specific one related to symbol loss framing? Of course, you could include other items there and then compare directly within the same hippocampus. That would be one thing.
But yes, I mean, as far as natural selection has imparted that mechanism in our brains to be employed in all sorts of different phenomena, I think prospect theory began with a textual representation of the Asian disease paradigm. So even though here we discuss about just losing some money and some pie charts, it began from text. So 400 people
But because we are like also one of your paranorms as an expert in this language processing, and when it comes to reading, for example, we know that the brain is not hardwired to read. That's also symbols, and you have to learn it, and you can get something from the face area, and you use these tissues. So I wonder whether symbolic representation in the hippocampus then also might be learned, and is then different from something that is already hardwired in a sense.
I see. So you're suggesting that the hippocampus may encode the concept of frame independently of another region that encodes emotions, and I don't see the reason why not, but I don't have the data to support either.
Okay, no, but it's okay. It's good. Then something more close to the data, and I know that colleague Jan has a similar question. But might follow up on that. So you choose in chapter 2 the range 1 to 8 hertz, but you introduce also theta as a functional concept. To me, doing surface EEG 1 to 8 is not theta. This is really like causing for problems when I do EEG analysis. I usually do not do that. I avoid that. I go from 3 to 7. That would be my theta. If I look into theta synchrony in a broader range, I get a different topic. So what is the reason for your choice?
Yeah, that's also an excellent question. The reason for my choice comes from evidence, mainly from Joshua Jacobs and the group with Kahana, where in the last 15 years they have many studies where they show that what we define as theta has some functional correspondence to what, so it begins from rats navigating environments or humans having memory. But then they run the same experiments to humans with intracranial recordings, and they see that the same response that you would expect to be in the 4 to 8 hertz in the rat is actually happening from 1 to up to 14. They find peaks up to 14. So the functional definition of theta being a strict 4 to 8 kind of breaks down. And I would understand someone saying, yes, you're including delta there. What is that? But then again, delta are the waves that we get throughout sleep. They are mainly slow waves that we see then, or during resting state.
So that argument I get, but we also know this work by School, for example, where they do this cross-frequency coupling, where you then actually compare how theta in humans is nested with gamma, and that actually by stimulating theta, you can then also elevate the amount of cycles on gamma, and therefore then also change working memory capacity, for example. So this theta range also in humans seems to be valid. My simple question is, did you look into that by just like taking out the bandwidth of 3 to 7? Would you then see a different pattern in your framing results?
Can I quickly add something to the previous one and then get to this? So I think I would circle back to saying that if I wouldn't do that, so having known that there is evidence that when people run episodic memory studies with intracranial recordings, they find peaks from 1 to 14, had I said, okay, you do find peaks, but I limit my analysis to 4 to 8, I'm also a bit shooting at my own feet in the sense that I don't, if I had 45 subjects, I think I would have the luxury to do that and then analyze 20 of them and see something. But in this case, if I would limit my data and rerun the analysis, I don't think I would have, I would exclude data that literature suggests are meaningful, and I would bring myself to a position where I wouldn't be able to even validate if the split I did was right. And getting back to, sorry, this was an addendum to the previous one, but partially relevant to your second one, sorry, but the second one was theta is relevant for gamma, and
did you look into?
if I looked, yes. I think in the beginning, when I got my very first 3 subjects, I looked at everything. I started looking at all sorts of things, and then I came across this evidence without having my whole sample, and then I stuck with this throughout the rest of the analysis. Because these data sets come slowly, so when I had, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I had the chance to play around, and I started coming across this literature, I said, okay, this is the way to go, and this is the way I'm going to go.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Do I have still time, or shall I?
Let's move on.
Okay.
Yeah. So the opposition will be continued by Professor De Martino from the Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience at Maastricht University.
Dear candidate, thank you very much for inviting me to read your thesis, and congratulations to you primarily and to your supervisors, promoters, co-promoters, for a very beautiful thesis. I liked it primarily because I am an ignorant of the topic, and I learned a lot, and I read it a few months back, and now reread it again for preparing for today, and I'm thinking a lot about what all your results mean, and learned so much. For me, it was very useful, so thank you very much. It's very well written, I think very clear, which is also helping people like me that don't know much about the topic to understand something. Now, of course, like anyone else that is here, I am forced to ask you some questions. So I have to, because I am not an expert, I make links to things that I know. So my first question is whether you would agree that I could explain to myself the framing effect as the fact that when a person is framing in a negative way, my priors on which I base my decisions are changing.
What do you define as priors in this context? Is it a Bayesian prior or?
Yes. So I see, from my perspective, I see many of these things to be based on evidence and prior combinations, and decisions follow. And I think, well, to some extent, what this means is that although you are presenting the same identical monetary value, perhaps the prior associated to a negative frame is just different. And that is what explains the framing effect. Just, the prior is different.
Allow me to correct. Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words, and I'm very happy you enjoyed reading my thesis. Sorry, very interesting question, and I jumped into answering. Sorry. We assume a symbolic difference between the loss and the gain frame. I think you could call that a different prior. You're in a different state, so to say.
Yeah. In that sense, to me, it's nice because then I can explain this highly adaptive behavior. I wouldn't call it a bias. I actually would call it more an adaptive behavior because priors change, and they don't have to necessarily change in a specific way. You could also think that probably this is a parametric thing, and there are ways in which you can change it in different ways. But then comes my issue with some of the things, because then if I frame it this way, sorry for the framing, use of the frame and stealing the frame, then I think, it makes a lot of sense that the hippocampal architecture that hippocampus is considered to be the apex of all of this. To some extent, we know the hippocampus many of these phenomena actually link to what you call or the imagination that relates to what I So if this is, then there is a piece of evidence that has struck me actually modeled by reward. Rats, I think this is the lab that static, but they learn actually reward. Imagine that this place is actually malleable, and that higher reward compared to others. So now, if this is the case, and has been shown only in rats, but now how
Question is that associated with reward, while the loss frame is not.
or with a different kind, negative reward versus positive. In sorts of computational algorithms on reinforcement learning, you would normally code these two things differently. You would not code them the same because they're not the same thing. So it's now the fact that you have effect in hippocampus. Does it matter? And is it really not just this instead of emotions? For example, you're saying, oh, it's emotional, it's amygdala that drives all of these changes the hippocampus or does something. Is it not just simpler than that? It's just the fact that people have a reward mechanism. They are affected by the negative rewards in a negative frame.
I see. Wouldn't then, though, I think we would then see a main effect of frame in the hippocampal activity, not an interaction. If this was a global, no?
So what do you mean by this? Can you explain?
The activity difference in the hippocampus would just depend on the frame and not on decision, not the type of cross that statistics showed, but this is what is
on whether they have decided to gamble or not gamble.
Yes. Independent of choice. Because the hippocampus is an automatic thing. Before we are conscious of anything, it has processed, right? So if this was an engram of frame in the hippocampus, mechanism that explained everything, automatically activated just on the frame you're at, not based on the decision you're going to do. Unless these lines of automatic forward replay diverge when you also decide what you're going to do. In which case, yes, this might be the case.
Okay, no, I can see your point, although I do think that generally, in probabilistic environments, I mean, I'm not saying that your is, but I know that in probabilistic environments, forward play, it's entertaining multiple possible outcomes, not just one, right? So in theory, it is possible to, in fact, have the fact that you start from a place and then you could just be affected by the way that you are moving into I don't know, in this case, imaginary, thought of like, okay, I'm going to decide to gamble, then it doesn't matter, or I'm going to decide to, in fact, stick with this, and it does matter. I don't know, but it's an interesting thought, the one that you had about the interaction. I didn't think about it. Okay, now I'm going to go instead to my familiar territory, which is Tesla, so I feel much better with that, and I feel comfortable. So you have ascribed all reasons for not finding effects in the hippocampus at 3T or 1.5 Tesla to SNR. So you said, okay, sensitivity is not high enough. We go to 7T, we get more signal. Then you don't find anything, okay. So my question now is, number one, I think if you wanted to maximize sensitivity at 7T, perhaps you should have thought about your protocol a bit better, because you're doing multiband 2 and multiband 3 and grappa 2, and that's really SNR starved, and especially more centrally in the brain. But I have an alternative explanation of why you don't find anything, and that is specificity, partial voluming with other regions. And so perhaps in fact, the problem is not at all any of these, but just the fact that you should have done higher resolution, so even higher than 1.4 millimeter. So do you think this is possible? So do you think that that in fact we should stick to trying to do 70 and just do higher res?
Sensitivity side. So the argument is that perhaps if we wanted to increase in that front, we would not have the same coverage of the brain, which was something that we did not want to exclude, since we still had a replication target in sight. And I mean, yeah, if we recorded only from the hippocampus, yes, everything would be better, but we wouldn't be able to say anything about the ACC and other areas, for which I don't make a strong case, but we have a very rich data set that can be analyzed much further, and for which we intend to acquire more insights, and also replicate other effects in the ACC or DLPFT. So
yeah, I understand, although if you want to make an argument of why you are moving to 7 Tesla, I think this is a relevant thing to always to think. Many people just simply say more signal, but in regions like this one, also in the midbrain, we had exactly the same experience, for example, with the medial genicular body, where increasing SNR was not enough. We actually needed to do higher resolution compared, for example, the inferior colliculus, because the proximity to the CSF in that case or other things was very detrimental. So my feeling is that you have to think about your question. So if your question was hippocampus, I would have sacrificed some of the other regions and tried to understand whether there is something in the hippocampus there, but you're not getting it because the issue is just confounding it with a lot of other stuff.
Totally get it. To quickly answer before they stop us. No, because you
can always finish your answer.
Can I? Okay.
Don't worry. So go on.
Okay, so I would answer for the second part, that I analyzed activity.
asked.
Can I finish?
You can briefly.
I can finish. So something I spend a lot of effort in, and I describe in the methods, is that to avoid the contamination from nearby brain regions, especially CSF or even the amygdala in the front. I included functional voxels, of which 7 out of 8 belonged in the ROI.
Yeah.
Because the automatic technique, and I was surprised to find that out, is you press the button and then it picks. If just one label is in and the 90% of the voxel is in another region, it's still thrown in the analysis, which didn't feel right. Yeah.
Okay, Sofoklis Goulis, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense, and I request that you and your company leave this room, and after the deliberation, the beadle will come and collect you to return to this room. Please, parents, please, audience, please follow us. Sofoklis Goulis, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree doctor. Dr. van de Ven is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please all rise.
Before we go there, I need to ask you something. Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent and responsible? What is your answer?
Yes, I promise.
Then by the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer to you, Sofoklis Goulis, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee and affixed with the official seal of the university. Something like this. Yeah.
Please.
Please be seated.
I can keep this off, right? I don't have to do it again. So, right. It is my honor to give the laudatio to you. And I'll start by saying that you probably know you have a bit of a reputation in terms of being immaculately dressed. You like this is how I got to know you when you were a student. A certain way of presenting yourself. Also your overall attention to presentation, to holding yourself in terms of being, well, as I've heard others refer to you as sort of like a Greek Adonis type of, very noticeable, put it that way. But yeah, we go way back, I guess, more than 7 years, maybe? 8. So as far as my own hippocampus lets me remember, our first project was it the marble study? Yes, the marble study. Okay. In which we started already with hippocampal investigations as part of an fMRI design on temporal memory. And I remember, if it's correct, that we use this sort of like video game environment, right, where people would walk through an environment, and then we tried to measure neural activity as people had these temporal experiences. I guess our hippocampal journey started there, and we've been looking into the hippocampus ever since in various forms. And it's all the more wonderful, I guess, that we now have this wonderful PhD thesis on this topic of decision-making still anchored to the hippocampus. So I see this as sort of like a culmination of the work that we have done together over the many years. I very much came to know you and appreciate you in your hunger for knowledge and hunger for science in general. I remember many interesting discussions on lots of different topics, science as well as non-science related. And I was surprised and impressed by the level of depth, well-spokenness, thoroughness in which you explain yourself and explain what it is that you're talking about. It was always very, rewarding to exchange in our discussions in these type of matters. It's still something I cherish very much. And I saw this behavior not just in our discussions, but also with the students in our group, at the Palm group. So Peter says hi. Palm group. Oh, Peter says hi. Where you extended your discussions on these matters essentially to everyone, not just your supervisors or professors, but also the students. And both your candidness, well-spokenness, but also your, let's say, lack of tolerance for nonsense. I appreciate a lot. It was very impressive. I also saw that you were very warm and open at the same time. So other than being focused on scientific details, being critical about this, you also were very warm and open to others. Particularly, I remember at a party at my place where you spent some time talking to my son. At the time he was maybe 12 or 11 or so, and I remember that he told me he discussed his high school plans with you. That was very very endearing. Strong combination of different skills. I'm trying to say. Sorry. So after your marble thesis, you continue with me in the master thesis, where Christian came on board, where you started looking into EFIS data for the first time, and also showed there a lot of creative insight in how to tackle the sophisticated data set. And we were so impressed that we thought we should immediately move you on to the PhD position that we then had available. And I sort of remember throwing a bit onto you, sort of, right? Well, my impression that it was, but I think we started out on this 3-faculty integration, where you had this unique, but I think also challenging situation of being at multiple places at the same time almost, where you'd have to be at 1 or 3 faculties, working on different data sets and different modalities. And perhaps what confounded that also was the start of your PhD coinciding with the very tough and difficult time of the COVID lockdown, which turned out to be a very challenging situation for you as well as also for us. We could not immediately step in and help you out or be there when I felt that you would need us the most, when we were separated by Zoom and by screens. And it was a rough start also for us to see how we should handle this. All the more impressive, I think, that over the years you have not only fought yourself out of this difficult situation, but actually made out an amazing story out of your PhD trajectory and all the stuff that you have collected and done in those 4 years. I imagine it is not easy to have initially 5 and then later 3 captains on a ship, all coming from different directions with different backgrounds, wanting different things from you, and you being pulled left and right and being at different faculties with different cultures and different ways of doing it. And I think you've perhaps against these oppressive odds have done amazingly well. I still find it an amazing feat that you were able to handle all of this and then deliver such a wonderful package as a PhD thesis. I remember that in the last year, when all things came together, your various studies and chapters and traveling about to SFN, where you also presented your stuff, that at some point in October, was it October 2023? You really started to get worried about finding a postdoc position, what to do after the PhD is ready. And I think within 2 or 3 weeks, you arranged contact. Within 2 months, you had talks at 3, 4 different labs. Worked your way up to the highest of those labs, at least here in Europe. You had a contact in the States. And so within 3 or 4 months, you again turned the odds of being so close to your deadline into something in which you could choose where you would want to go, and everybody was willing to welcome you to the lab. So you have a way of changing a tough situation into something that is in your benefit. It's an amazing feat. I'm very proud of seeing you develop from a hungry young PhD marble student looking at the hippocampus in terms of time to actually taking advantage of that time to now being here as your own, as your own independent, very creatively and very strong, powerful scholar. So I'm very proud that you made it all this way in this way. There's one thing though that I do need to point out, that where I think you sort of fell a bit, where we were talking about some cultural influences, some cultural contexts, and I showed you my my little keychain thing that I had gotten at Walt Disney, at the Disney park, and you confidently and with authority said, "That's the Star Destroyer from Star Wars." And then I was astonished because it was not a Star Destroyer, but it was the Millennium Falcon. So you mistook the light side of the Force for a representation that belonged to the other side. So I figured before you leave and you go off to your own little adventure outside of our university, I should give you a proper token to remind you that you're still on the light side.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so yeah, I should put on my hat as the SIN director now, so the co-director of the Center for Integrative Neuroscience. It's very nice that we have the founder, one of the persons who then continued to make this into a success, and now myself here. And I just wanted to emphasize one more time what Vincent already said. Yeah, so this interdisciplinary work is something like politics. Yeah, so people really like talking about it. But the reality on the ground, if you have to put it into place, is sometimes very tough. And I think you noticed this. But I think it's important that every successful PhD defense like this brings our effort, I think, forward and helps other people coming after you to benefit from this. Yeah, not only scientifically, but also in terms of organization and everything. Yeah, so I think many people that you don't know and maybe you will never know will be grateful to you for cutting a breach in a sense. Yeah, so and I hope you will continue in this effort and think across not just methodological lines but also disciplinary lines. Yeah, so I think you did a really great job in this. Not getting frustrated when the economists were using these strange terms again and or ways of implementing the experiments that didn't make sense to the psychologists. So I remember we had many discussions. But what I really admire is that you always kept an open mind and continued towards this goal of finding out more about what was going on in this task. Yeah, so once again, thanks a lot from my side and congratulations. Yeah.
Dear Dr. Goulis, also on behalf of the Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. And I hereby close this academic ceremony. And now I would like to ask us, or